When most people discuss the topic of fixing our broken education system, they decide to, well, fix it. They suggest more useful lessons like how to use money and first aid. However, I don't believe this would work. I am here to argue that it is not only impossible to fix our broken education system, that it is broken beyond repair, but instead that we should abolish the education system, that society would be better off without schools. Let's start with the first point, that it is impossible to fix the education system. Nobody believes that atomic bonds or sine cos tan are actually useful in real life unless you want to get a job that requires that knowledge. However, many people contend that if we simply replace this information by teaching something actually useful, then school would become useful. However, I'd like to ask, won't we simply learn that stuff when we need it? When I need to know something for my real life, I learn it for my real life quite quickly and perhaps never forget it. When you became an adult, okay, you had practically no knowledge of how to file taxes, get a job, or pay rent. Yet, within a few months, thanks to the advice of some of your parents and perhaps friends, you were fully into the swing and rhythm of being an adult. Similarly, if I need to know the powerhouse of the cell in real life, then I will learn it in my real life. My point here is that school will always be useless because of the fact that you will learn what you need to learn when you need to learn it. This has become especially true with the advent of Google. In my opinion, this made an already outdated education system even more outdated because of the fact that I can find all the information they teach me in school within a matter of seconds on the device that is right over here and I am reading the script off of. So now let's move on to the second reason that I hate school. Exams. We'll be talking about how exams decide how good your work is. With maths, sure, it's easy. You can just objectively say, this answer is right, this answer is wrong. But now take an essay-based subject like history. Essays are so subjective that you cannot possibly grade them on a number line. Out of 10, rate this essay. You can't do that. That's not how essays work. Instead, the student has to constrain their writing to fit with a very, very rigid and strict mark scheme, okay? And often, that means that the student has so little choice of what they can do that they just don't write what they want to say and it makes the writing worse. I can personally attest to this, okay? I am a history nerd, okay? I have been obsessed with history for years, alright? I talk about history to hundreds of people a day on my YouTube channel. Alright, I know more about history than anybody in my class, and yet, when the final exam results come in, I get the most average grades ever. Why? Why is it? Well, it's simple. I knew all of the information and I got it right. However, the mark scheme doesn't care. The mark scheme just cares that I wrote these essays in the exact rigid sentence structure that it likes, okay? So even when I did not give a single piece of wrong information and loads upon loads of right information, I get maybe a 5 out of 9, simply because I didn't write it in the paragraph structure that they wanted. A paragraph structure that well, if you try to submit a peer-reviewed paper with that paragraph structure, they're going to, look at you weird, because it's not very good. But, I mean, it's just the point of, there's no way to objectively say this is bad, this is good. Like, I'm sorry. And this is the same problem for every single art subject. Music, English, film, art, history. Every single subject where the work is subjectively good, like art, and not objectively good, like maths, is held back by grading. It doesn't teach students how to produce a good piece of work. All it does is teach them how to do what they're told and follow the mark scheme to the letter. And fundamentally, I don't see a way in which you can create a fair mark scheme unless you just cut all these subjects completely, or at least banned essays from them. And that's why that despite loving history as my favourite thing in the world, I regret taking history for GCSE, and I shall not be taking it for A-levels. So now that I've explained why I think school is unfixable, we must consider, what is the alternative? Well, I think the alternative is, instead of going to school, we simply don't go to school. Instead of learning through the classroom, we should be learning through life. We try to pick up as much useful skills and knowledge as we can in our childhood, not through school, but through hobbies, and Google, and going to museums probably. We just stop sending children to school, and instead allow them control over their passions, allowing them to choose what they learn, how they learn it, when they learn it, and what part of that thing they learn. Developing useful skills, and following, and I know I've already said this, their passions. This method of child rearing has been around since the 70s, but it has gotten easier since the advent of Google, obviously. And we call it unschooling. There is no set curriculum, and the parent is there as a guide that ensures the child is able and encouraged to learn. Now, there's obviously a difference between unschooling and homeschooling. Homeschooling is effectively school at home. You know, it's the same stupid, mark schemes and all of that. But unschooling is a lot more fluid, flexible, and free. And ultimately, that is for me the whole selling point of unschooling. The freedom that you offer to your child from the horrors of the education system. But does unschooling work in practice? Numerous academic papers have been published on unschooling, of which I've read several. I also looked online on Google and Reddit to see if I could find any personal accounts of unschooling. And yes, I found some. Most of the accounts are positive. I could find a few negative accounts of unschooling of people who didn't have a good time doing it. And I will get to those later because there is a lot of important stuff to talk about there. However, a large majority of the accounts that I can find of unschooling depict it as a successful and beneficial process that was much better than what the actual education system would have done to them. Of course, there were a lot of people set back by unschooling. This proves that it is possible to do unschooling right, but also possible to fuck it up. The main argument against unschooling is, of course, children need to read and learn basic maths. Indeed, if you watch any video arguing against unschooling, then likely this will be one of their main arguments. I'd first like to respond to this statement by saying unschoolers do learn to read and practice. I've read so many accounts of unschooling and several academic papers, and I could not find a single person who said that unschooling failed to teach them how to read. Not even the most critical account I could find. Not even the person who had by far the worst experience out of anybody unschooling claimed that unschooling failed to teach them how to read. Not a single unschooler or unschooling parent claimed that a child that they knew had failed to learn to read based on unschooling. I went on Google Scholar to see if I could find any papers about this. One of them was an educational professional with decades of experience and described how their unschooling child learned to read. The other was a survey of 28 former unschoolers, now adults, asking them how they learned to read. Now, while all of them did learn to read, most of them didn't really know how, simply because, when you go back to before the age of 8, which is when most of them learned to read, you don't really remember much that far back, especially when you're an adult. However, the closest we ever came was one of the kids said that he was read to every single day and he tried to follow along and eventually he picked it up. As for the full-on account of the other thing, they talked about how they taught their kids to read. It was basically a case of creating an environment where they were exposed to so much literature, so many opportunities to read and write, and of course being read to every single day, and then all of their kids just picked it up. Just because I don't learn to read at the same age you did, that does not mean I'll never know how to read. Of course, the other thing we have to talk about when not teaching your kids how to read is the differences between several different kinds of unschooling. Let's talk about the homeschooling spectrum right here. You have homeschooling on one end, then you have relaxed homeschooling, unschooling, and finally radical unschooling. And radical unschooling, that is the kind of unschooling that has the potential to be dangerous. So the difference between unschooling and radical unschooling is radical unschooling, you basically leave the child to it. There's very, very little parental support or guidance. But with just plain old unschooling, the parent still does help and intervene and guide the child a lot. They try to make so many opportunities for stuff that the children could develop an interest in. But they don't force them to develop an interest in anything, they give them a lot of options. The point I'm trying to make here is that no two families will do unschooling the same, okay? If you really, really, really want your child to be able to read or do basic maths fluently by 6 or 7 years old, then instead of just doing unschooling, you take your homeschooling spectrum and move it slightly away from unschooling and slightly towards relaxed homeschooling. When you put it there, you get to teach your children to read while still doing mostly unschooling. And I'd say that's a good compromise. To summarise this part of the video, to the people who say unschooling kids will never learn to do the important things that school teaches you, A, how to read and useful stuff that you learn in maths is taught by the end of year 3, and so after that, almost all of it's useless. B, all evidence points to the fact that actually unschoolers do learn to read. And C, you don't have to do complete unschooling. You can just teach your kids to read if you like, Similarly, literally every study and survey about unschooling that's pretty much that I could find, has concluded that unschooling is a good thing, that it works, that it's beneficial. Despite this, I have reason to believe that unschooling doesn't always work. All of the studies had a very, very small subject group. The largest one I could find had 230 people or something, and of course this is because of how hard it is to find subjects. No country in the world keeps an official list of unschoolers. They just group them under homeschoolers, which is stupid because the two things are very, very different. So the only way to find subjects is to go onto a social media page related to unschooling. And obviously the only people on social media pages related to unschooling are going to be people who had a great time unschooling and therefore are enthusiastic about it and are going to rate it highly, okay? Of course, there could be some people who didn't like unschooling who are, you know, desperately trying to warn others against it. The other limitation of these surveys is that a lot of the people surveyed are the parents and not the children. You know, I feel like I'd rather speak to the children because these are the ones that we're talking about here. I was able to find numerous posts on Reddit about how people are talking about they deeply regret unschooling. And this is from the perspective of the parent and the child. They consistently described it as a cult, about how even when they begged their parents to teach them, or just to send them to an actual school, they would refuse, reading them terror articles about the horrors of the actual schooling system, claiming that their kids were far better off than those academically stupid normie kids.
Every single time you even had any vague notion that you might be losing faith in the idea of unschooling, you were going to get yelled at and disciplined. It's ironic, because the whole point of unschooling is to give your child freedom. If you're indoctrinating them into believing in something, that isn't freedom. My number one piece of advice for unschooling would actually be don't treat it like a cult. Sadly, what a lot of parents choose to do.
The people giving these accounts even accused their parents of abuse and neglect. When one child attempted suicide, the mother first denied it before blaming it on teenage hormones. And I'm not saying this to scare you out of unschooling. I firmly believe that unschooling, when done right, is an amazing thing. But unschooling, when done wrong, can have terrible consequences. Not all unschoolers are so radical and terrible as the parents that I've described in this last paragraph, but you have to be able to maintain critical thinking so that you don't do it the same way these bad flavours of unschoolers do it. I just want to warn you of the risks, and I wanted to tell you to be educated and do your research properly. If anyone goes down a rabbit hole of learning about unschooling because of this video, I want you to understand how to do it right. You don't just leave your kid to it and hope they develop an education. No, you have to leave items strategically and intentionally around the house to hope your kid develops an interest in these items without forcing them to do anything. You have to give suggestions and ideas of what your kid could do, like taking them to parks, museums, monuments. Completely abandoning your child? Of course they'll have an education of a year 3 at age 19. This is your job as the parent of an unschooler, to stimulate your kids' mental growth and make them want to learn. That's what makes unschooling better than actual school. School makes children hate learning. Unschool, when done right, makes them love it. The other thing I cannot stress enough, and it should go without saying, don't just use this video as your only source. I've left so many links about unschooling in the description. Actually learn how to do it properly, you know, before you do it to your child. I know I've said this so many times before, but be responsible, alright? That's what I'm trying to say from this section of the video. The other thing we have to consider when it comes to unschooling is getting a degree and going to university. The only valid reason I could think of to go to school is to go to university or get a good job. I can only find one survey that answered the question of whether or not unschoolers were able to go to university. The answer was 83% of them did. Now, while this is way higher than average, the survey was done on 75 people, so not a big enough test group. However, upon further research, most universities do accept homeschoolers, even if they haven't completed the national curriculum. Which, you know, not completed the national curriculum, that's exactly what you're looking for, frankly, if an unschooler wants to get into university. Although, I should mention, this is only depending on the course. Also, of course, an extremely high percentage of those kids were going to go to university. I mean, these are unschoolers, so they're definitely going to be well-off privileged kids. Oh yeah, wait, did I mention? Unschooling is a full-time job. You have to keep at least one parent at home at all times to watch the kid, especially in those first few years. So therefore, assuming you only have two parents, you have to be able to survive off exactly one person's income. Meaning that to be an unschooler or a homeschooler in the first place, you always have to have some baseline level of privilege. Like these days, your parent has to get paid a decent amount to afford to feed the family off of one income. I just want to let that sink in, you know, marinate in that thought that if you want to liberate your child from hours of horrible, menial, mundane tasks every day, then you have to be able to afford it, and you don't even get a tax exemption, which is... Still, While unschooling is not an option for the average person now, who knows? Productivity rates are going up. We don't need 5 days to get all our work done anymore. The average worker spends a significant amount of their time not working because they get to the end of their work week and realise, oh wait, I'm out of work, let's just pretend to be busy so my boss doesn't give me more work. And this has happened before. It used to be that the average work day was 6 days because it required 6 days to get all your work done. But then the Industrial Revolution happened. Productivity rates went up, and the workers unionised and protested, and eventually they forced their bosses to knock that 6th day off because they didn't need it anymore. So now people were working 1 day less but with the same salary. Now, the second revolution has happened, the internet revolution, and because you don't need all 5 days, already you now have advocates of a 4-day work week. And when the working class finally forces the normalisation of a 4-day work week, productivity is going to keep increasing. And here's the thing, technological advancement speeds up normally. Within like maybe 30 years, it could be possible that the average person will have the same salary but just only work 4 days. And of course now, AI exists, and AI is advancing at a speed we couldn't possibly imagine. So with AI, how long before workers are working on average 3 days a week? Or 2. And when it gets to the point that the average working week is 3 days, unschooling will then be possible for the average person. Because your average couple will be able to take turns working and still make enough to live off of, and they'll still be able to keep at least one parent with the child at all times. So maybe in this day and age you won't be able to afford unschooling, but who knows? Perhaps in a couple of generations, unschooling will be an option for most people, assuming that the cost of living isn't like the salary of Elon Musk at that point. Still, I hope this video motivated you or convinced you to consider unschooling as an option. If you're a child watching this video, maybe after doing a bit more research, try to pitch it to your parents as an idea. They're probably going to say no. I doubt you can convince your parents, but you know, there's an off chance. But if you're a parent and if you want to do unschooling for your kid, then definitely do a lot more research after this video. You know, don't screw it up. But you know, I hope I convinced some people to give it a go.